Hi, everyone. My name's Caitlin Frost, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator here at the National Weather Center. I'm going to be your host for our first ever virtual Women in Science panel for the week of National Weather Festival. I hope you guys have been enjoying all of the content so far, and there's plenty more to come through Saturday, October 31st. I would like to introduce all of my panelists today, starting with Dr. Robin Tanamachi. Can you please give us a little introduction about yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Professor Robin Tanamachi. I'm an assistant professor of atmospheric science at Purdue University, which is located in Northwest Indiana, where I do mainly research on severe convective storms and tornadoes using weather radar, but I've also branched out into atmospheric science education research. So how can we best teach the meteorologists of the future the skills and the knowledge that they need to have in order to be successful in their careers? I got my PhD from OU in 2011, and I got my bachelor's from the University of Wisconsin-Madison back in 2001.
Awesome, thank you. We also have Dr. Cassandra Shivers-Williams. Can you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Cassandra Shivers-Williams. I am a research scientist at the NOAA Cooperative Institute for Mesoscale Meteorological Studies, or SIMS with 2 M's. And I'm housed at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. And my research involves human decision making. So my background is in social psychology. I got my PhD from Howard University in 2018, my master's from Howard as well, and my bachelor's degree in psychology from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so I really look at the kinds of factors that influence people's protective decisions as they respond to personally threatening situations, including severe weather.
Wonderful, thank you. And we also have Dr. Naoko Sakaeda. Will you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Naoko Sakaeda. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma, where the National Weather Center is. My expertise or research interests mainly focus on large-scale tropical meteorology. That means not tropical cyclones or hurricane, but my interest will be on the atmospheric waves that exist in the tropics and how they behave and how they might interact with the exotropics. I got my PhD in atmospheric sciences from University at Albany and bachelor's degree at University of Washington in Seattle.
Awesome, thank you. And we also have Dr. Jana Houser with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Jana Houser. I'm currently an associate professor at Ohio University, and I also do severe convective storm studies. So I feel like I could just say ditto to what Robin said. But I'm from Pennsylvania as a place of origin. I grew up there, went to Penn State University for my undergrad, and went to the University of Oklahoma for my master's degree and my PhD, and currently living in Ohio with 3 kids, 2 dogs, and 3 cats, and 11 chickens.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourself, and I hope everyone has a better sense of everyone that's on this panel right now. So we asked everyone to send us these amazing questions that we have for all of our panelists today. We have 7 main questions that we're going to be asking everyone, and there's always room for discussion at the very end. So we're going to be answering questions today in the exact order in which we introduced everyone. And we'll go ahead and we'll dive into the very first question we have. This is a pretty good question, and I feel like everyone's going to have a really fun story to this one. So we'll go ahead and start with Dr. Tanamachi. What is the most irritating thing people have said to you as a woman in science?
Well, my answer is going to be a little maybe off target, but it's not so much what people say. I can handle that just fine. It's what people don't say. And an example of that would be not addressing me as Dr. Tanamachi or Professor Tanamachi, but by my first name as Robin, where they might not do that with a male colleague of mine. I feel that that's disrespectful to the time and energy that I spent on earning my PhD, and it kind of devalues my PhD.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dr. Williams, do you have something to say on this too?
I do, and it's actually really interesting. Robin stole my comment. Um, I get it a little less in the building, but I think one of the most irritating things to me as well is being referred to as Miss instead of doctor. I experienced that more while I was in academia, whereas male professors are almost always doctors, even if they're grad students and they don't have seniority, but female professors tend to be Miss or by the first name. So less colleagues, but more just in general. And I do agree with Robin. I feel like it's very disrespectful and presumptive. So I think that's probably the most irritating thing I deal with regularly, and being mistaken for a student because people don't know who I am. So when I first started working in the building, because everyone didn't know me, they assumed that I was a student. And, you know, I had one person say something to me on the elevator. I was like, well, actually, I'm a postdoc. I have my PhD already. And then I, you know, not so politely got off the elevator. So that tends to get a little irritating over time.
Absolutely. Dr. Sakaeda, do you have thoughts on this?
The story that Robin and Cassandra just shared are something that I was going to mention as well. It was hard for me to kind of pinpoint something that I thought, okay, this is exactly happened to me because I am a woman, because we all have mixture of different identities and we're not just a woman. So I think it might not be just because I'm a female scientist, but it could be because of my ethnicity or age or whatever identity that do not match as a typical stereotypical professor in science. That might lead to some condescending or disrespectful attitudes or behavior based on people's just identity-based assumption of my career stage. This is, I think, exactly what Cassandra and Robin were talking about. Yeah, I often been assumed as a student, which makes some people think that they can behave in a certain manner that is not respectful to anybody, regardless of a career stage or what title that somebody has. So I think, yeah, I'm not really adding much, but I guess I'm agreeing or sharing the same experience that other panelists have.
Absolutely, yeah. Sounds like we have a lot of the same stories behind what the most annoying thing to experience or listen to is with us. Dr. Houser, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to change it up. So actually, I had my first baby in grad school. So motherhood and, you know, the family is very important to me. So my husband and I decided that while I was basically ABD, we would have our first child. So I found out that I was pregnant about a year or so, maybe about a year and a half before defending my dissertation. And I remember it just sort of happened that I was on the elevator with one of the male committee members of my dissertation, and I told him, I said, you know, just to let you know, I'm expecting a baby. And the response was not at all malicious, but it was still a little bit annoying to me, because the response was, oh my, I'm sorry. And I was like, well, it's kind of planned, you know, so this is the way we wanted things to happen. And you know, I'm sure, again, it was not intended to necessarily come off that way, but the response was very much, you know, like a little bothersome to me.
I think that would probably upset most of us here on the panel if we were finding out we were having a baby and that was the response we got from one of the committee members. That's lovely. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but I definitely think it's important to note that many of us deal with a lot of sexist comments, and then like Dr. Sakaeda was explaining, there's a lot of, you know, identities that cross into us besides being a woman or being a scientist. That goes into our ethnicity, it comes into our, maybe our financial backgrounds, our economic backgrounds. I think that this is really great to kind of bring to light some of these issues that we're all facing together. So thank you guys for your first response on that. This is another fun question I think we'll probably get a variety of answers to. So again, we'll start with Dr. Tanamachi. So what is it like being the only woman or one of the only women in the room usually?
So the thing that pops into my head immediately when I consider this question is the experience, which I know is almost universal among my female colleagues, which is we'll make a suggestion. A male colleague will repeat the suggestion 5 minutes later. Everybody's nodding knowingly here already. And a male colleague will repeat the suggestion, and then he gets credit for the suggestion, or the suggestion isn't taken seriously until it comes out of a man's mouth. This has happened to me in faculty meetings. It's happened on panels. It's happened at our welcome back picnic in the fall, for crying out loud. And what kind of message does that send to the department and to my female colleagues that their contributions are not as valued? I find that kind of experience to be disrespectful, and the worst part is that a lot of times the offenders are completely oblivious to the fact that they're doing it.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate. I definitely have experienced that a time or two, not even before I had graduated with my undergraduate degree. So I definitely think all of us have stories to share on this. So we'll go to Dr. Shivers-Williams next.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Robin. It also can be difficult to be the only woman in the room. We were talking about other kinds of biases that tend to pop up. So as the only or one of the few women in the room, I've been asked to do maybe more menial tasks like taking notes, or as Robin said, my opinion's not valued as highly, but it is important, and we bring an important perspective based on all of the different types of experiences that we have. And so we all have very different and valuable lenses to bring to the problem and to the table. And so while it can be daunting to be the only woman in a room, especially in a male-dominated field, it's important to do, and important to remember that, we're trained just as well, regardless of where we get our degrees or what field we're in. We are as supposed to be at the table as everybody else.
Yeah, really good point. I like to tell everyone we all take the same classes, we all have the same degree, so there should be no difference. Dr. Sakaeda, what are your thoughts and feelings on this?
I had to think really hard about this question because I think I don't notice it as much. And I think part of it is because I am used to it. It didn't just start since I became a professor. I think it started since maybe in high school, where you start taking advanced math and science courses. That's where you start to see you are one of the few female students in class, and that kind of accelerates as you move on career. And I thought maybe the reason why I didn't really find discomfort in the situation is maybe because I was lucky enough to have wonderful female colleagues, just a few, but around me. So having that network and connection with the other female colleagues were always helpful for me.
Yes, really, really good. I definitely strongly recommend anyone that's watching, that's a young woman interested in the science field. I think having scientific mentors that are also women in the same field is definitely very helpful. Dr. Houser, how are you feeling about this?
Yeah, my experience was very similar to Dr. Sakaeda's. I kind of grew up in a male-dominated neighborhood. I was playing football with the boys. I was always sort of surrounding myself with males more than females. And I think actually to a degree that was deliberate as a teenager, because I was frankly really annoyed with the drama and the craziness and the pettiness of teenage girls. So I found that when I hung out with guys, it was not there. So I tended to not really feel like I was noticing as much when I was, one of the few females in the room. Now, I have, as I've gotten later into my career, taken a little bit more notice to it, just sort of in an observational sense. And what I do notice is, particularly at one of the conferences that I go to, it's still very heavily dominated by males, and typically the male to female ratio is somewhere on the order of 4-to-1 or something like that, sometimes even higher, maybe like 8-to-1. So in those conferences, I always sort of want to take the opportunity when I'm given to just sort of be there and be engaged. I don't want to be like domineering or anything like that, or come across like I'm trying to overly insert myself, but I like to at least make my presence sort of felt and known so that people can actually, you know, acknowledge the fact that I'm a female in a room full of majority males.
Thank you all for your answers. I think this was a really good question, and I was actually really excited to see what a lot of you had said, because when I had realized going into the field of meteorology very young, I was a little oblivious to how off the ratio is between women and men. But like Dr. Houser was saying, growing up, I always kind of gravitated towards maybe hanging out with the guys a little bit more, being a little bit more of a tomboy. It's my personality, so it wasn't too hard of a transition. But sometimes I think people are quite shocked to join and see the discrepancy between male and female. So very, really, really interesting insight.
Caitlin, can I add something to that real quick that just came to my brain?
Absolutely.
So, I have noticed that oftentimes in a room full of males with one or two females, oftentimes the females have a very different perspective about a certain problem that we're dealing with, or a certain, you know, topic that we're talking about. And I find that very insightful to the male counterparts, and they're like, oh man, well, you know, I didn't even think about it that way, or I didn't even realize that that was potentially an issue. So I think the value of having that female voice present and being confident and not, you know, putting a lid on your thoughts is really important, because a lot of times I think men just in general tend to not really think the same way. Like, they don't think through the same processes we do. They don't have the same perspective that we do. And that perspective can be very valuable. And it's not necessarily that the men are trying to be deliberately rude. It's the fact that, you know, they're just thinking about things on a different level than the women are.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. So I think the more diversity we have in these rooms where important discussions are being had, I think the better, with men and women alike. So really, really glad to hear everyone's answers. Now, question number 3 is something that I definitely think is a tricky answer. I think everyone might have a different way of going about this due to their own personal opinions, experiences growing up. So we'll go ahead and start again with Dr. Tanamachi. So as a society, what can we do better to help raise young women to be scientists?
So my sort of tweetable response to that is that we should never speak to children, and particularly girls, about sort of the tension between work and domestic life as though it's a choice. That's a false choice, and it's one that's destructive of the idea of sort of integrating work and family life together. It also sends, and as the father of as the mother of 2 little boys, I'm acutely aware that, you know, my boys are receiving messages about what kind of careers they're expected to go into, and what careers are valued for men versus women, and presenting girls with this idea that work and family are in opposition. That's also sending a very damaging message to boys that their contributions in the domestic sphere are not valued as much either. Changing gears a little bit, I would also say that if you're in a position where you interact with young children, that you really take a moment to evaluate the way in which you praise boys and girls' accomplishments in STEM lessons and activities. Make sure that you're providing diverse examples of role models for them to look up to. So not just all old white males, but also, you know, women, and not just Marie Curie, you know, get beyond Marie Curie as well. And also people of color who've made enormous contributions to science, because we are finding more and more that diverse perspectives can really help push the envelope of science, can help enhance discovery and push science forward.
Very, very well-rounded answer. Now we have Dr. Shivers-Williams. What do you think on this?
Yeah, building on what Dr. Tanamachi just said, because I think all of those are very interesting perspectives, and some I hadn't even thought about. But to go along with that, also looking at the way in which boys and girls are socialized in school in terms of curriculum is one thing that we can maybe address, right? At least in my experience, girls tend to be more encouraged toward like English and the humanities, whereas boys tend to be socialized more toward the sciences and maths. So one thing that we can do is to encourage girls to, you know, thrive in science. Take math classes, take the hard science classes, do the things that you enjoy, because there's no right or wrong way to do it. Similar to Dr. Tanamachi just said, representation matters. So part of that also is changing the narrative and changing the image, changing the schema, right? As she mentioned, the old white male schema of that's what a scientist looks like. So changing the narrative and the types of examples that kids can mentally reference in terms of when I think of a scientist, who do I think of? When I think of an astronaut, who do I think of, right? So they need to have more types of scientist images available to say, hey, that could be me. Like I could be that person looks like me. And then also exposure to different types of scientists and sciences, right? STEM is super broad. And even the ways in which a single discipline can be defined, right? Like my discipline, psychology. In some schools, psychology lives with the life sciences, and other schools, it lives more with the social sciences. And, you know, it can be both. It can span lots of things. And so exposure early on to lots of different types of sciences and scientists can be helpful as well in terms of encouraging more girls to continue through science. And knowing someone who's been successful at lots of different levels is helpful as well, right? So it's not just knowing people who have PhDs, it's knowing people who have masters and do more applied things. It's knowing people who have bachelors and they do more science things. So there's a plethora of avenues that people can take. And so stressing that there isn't just one way to do it, I think would be really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Dr. Sakaeda, what is your perspective on this question?
There's already been a lot of good advices, and I don't think I have much to add. Yeah, as I second, encouraging and supportive of whatever children find to be of their interest, and definitely do not tell them that they're not good at something or they can't do it because of their identity or anything. Yeah, and increase maybe opportunity to experience science might be a way to go.
Awesome. Dr. Houser, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I echo basically everything that was said here. I also want to add that I think it's important for people to realize that science isn't nerdy. I think there's a lot of like media out there, and not even so much, I mean, I think we're gradually kind of moving away from the old white guy scientists like Albert Einstein sort of a thing. But I think there's still a little bit of the stereotype that scientists are like big dweeby people with big glasses who are socially awkward, you know. And while there may be individuals within our collective fields that do fit that role, I think the visibility of seeing sort of normal, quote unquote, people who are scientists is really important. And I think having kids shows like on PBS and on other, you know, accessible kid channels that portray scientists as not the stereotypical scientists would be a really big help. I also think that mentoring programs would be really important at like the middle school and high school level here locally. Now, this ended up not working because of COVID, but we were planning on having in the spring semester last year, a mentorship program between our university and the local high schools, where we basically just have like a lunch with some invited high school females who could come in. We had a panel of professionals lined up across a variety of different fields in the sciences and STEM. And we were just going to kind of do a one-on-one get to know you, and like not even so much about material, but just about people, like who you are. And I think another thing that steers women and young girls especially away from the sciences is a fear of math. So a lot of, I mean, I questioned my own ability to succeed in meteorology because I was scared of math as a teenager. And, you know, I didn't do poorly in my math classes, but I wasn't like a complete straight A student and getting 100% on all of my math classes. So I wondered, you know, am I smart enough to really be successful in this career? And I still make mistakes in derivations periodically, you know, and that happens. And I think we need to understand that it's okay to not be perfect and to just own up to the mistakes that you make, and realize that you don't have to be this, super uber intelligent person to be successful in the sciences.
Can I add to what Dr. Houser just said? I also think the mentoring programs are amazing. I think also increasing the visibility of those programs, because I feel like they exist, maybe not in large part and maybe not everywhere, but just finding ways to market them or announce them in ways that the people who we're trying to reach can actually like grab onto them and participate. As a graduate student at the NOAA Cooperative Science Center of Atmospheric Sciences and Meteorology at Howard, we had exactly what Dr. Houser described. There was a day somebody randomly asked me to give a talk about what I do. I was like, okay, I had no idea where I was going. And then it was a group of like middle school age girls and like young high school girls. And it was really cool because we got to have conversations and I got a tour of the building, right? I'm not a physical scientist. So I got to go with them and see all the cool instruments, and they got to launch a weather balloon. Like, it was really cool and it was engaging. And so definitely more programs of that. And then also just making them visible and available to everyone.
Really, really great answers. And Dr. Houser, I still have nightmares about ordinary differential equations. And even going back further, when I first learned in Algebra 2 that I'm supposed to look at an equation and know what it looks like on a graph, I still have, shivers about that. It kind of freaks me out still, but definitely second that. I think the next question we have, I think we've already kind of covered it, but I'll definitely ask it. I think we've kind of uncovered a little bit about everyone in different questions that we've already asked so far, but we'll go ahead and start again with Dr. Tanamachi. Have you ever faced difficulty in your career solely because of your gender?
I have, and the most acute example of this was definitely the biggest threat my career ever faced was 6 pounds, 12 ounces, and 19 inches long. In 2013, my oldest son was born. Intellectually, I understood that having a kid was going to have a huge impact on my career, but I was not really well prepared for just how biologically powerful that experience was and how all of my physical and mental faculties were going to be just laser focused on keeping this tiny person alive and thriving. And, that was a really tough thing to grapple with. There was a period of about 3 or 4 months where I was really questioning whether I was going to be able to continue on in the career path that I'd chosen, and this was after I'd gotten my doctorate. So but I'd invested so much in it that I persevered, and I'm really glad that I did, because eventually the hormones did recede and I was able to kind of get my brain back in the game again. But that period of the first 3 to 4 months of my child's life was extremely difficult. Unfortunately, I was much better prepared for it the second time around when we had our younger son.
Yes, I think having a kid is something that's very, there's just nothing quite like it. I don't have children yet, but just like how a lot of us have been mentioning, I'm kind of worried about, going into grad school, starting a family, but I think, women hearing what we're having to say today is really going to help them solidify. You can start a family and have a kid and go to grad school, get your PhD and work and be a researcher. It's okay. It might be challenging, but you can do it. You can do it. Moving on to Dr. Shivers-Williams.
Absolutely, it can be done, and I'm thankful that I did not have to deal with those kinds of expectations. But I would say yes. My matriculation through grad school, the job that I'm in now, as I kind of mentioned before, some of the setbacks that I've experienced are like, being looked down on or devalued, or like my perspective is not weighted as heavily. I was a postdoc when I first got here. So, and that's that really weird phase where you're not quite a grad student, but you're not quite a full employee either. And a lot of people don't really know what to do with you. So there were, some weird things with that, but also just lower expectations, I guess, as a woman in a predominantly male field, but also, as Dr. Sakaeda mentioned earlier, lots of different identity aspects crossing, right? I am a Black female, and so there are different kinds of stigmas and stereotypes that I have to fight as well. And so having to deal with those kinds of expectations. So when something happens or when a microaggression happens, it's like, okay, is it because I'm a female? Is it because I'm a person of color? Is it because I'm younger than everybody else? And sometimes there's anxiety with that ambiguity as well. So I think that things like that happen, but they're not insurmountable. It just takes like some intentional, dedicated time to deal with it.
Really, really good. Love that. Dr. Sakaeda?
Yeah, I think my difficulty is mostly internal, something maybe not externally visible, but that doesn't mean it's disconnected to external factors. So more particularly, my battle is fighting imposter syndrome and building confidence. And it might sound like it's just my personality, but it could be contributed by the fact that people have told me I shouldn't pursue science because I'm a woman, or I won't be able to do it because I'm a woman, or whatever the reason is. So yeah, I think that is that internal difficulty that I struggle with, but at the same time, I feel like that's an easier one to deal with because it's all internal. It's not like my institution is trying to put a barrier on my career progress or anything like that. So I can work on it myself. Like I can build my confidence by working harder, or I just try to tell myself that I can keep going as long as I don't stop myself.
Another really good perspective on that. Really, really, that's something people don't think about, what we think of ourselves and how that's affecting our work, our school, everything. So really good answer. Dr. Houser?
Yeah, I completely can identify with Dr. Sakaeda in the idea of imposter syndrome, because that's something that I struggle with too. And to me, I feel like it's almost more difficult to deal with because I have to train myself to find ways to feel confident. If there's something outright, I can point my finger at it and say, oh, you did this, or this is a problem and let's fix this. Looking internally and trying to figure out how to make myself feel more confident is a lot more challenging in my own opinion. So yeah, and I think women almost across the board tend to struggle with this in some way, shape, or form. So I don't think we are unique in that. I've spoken to students of mine who feel the same way, and I know that it's pretty pervasive. And I find that males tend to not struggle with this nearly to the extent that females do. Sometimes you will have a male student or a male colleague that struggles with it, but there tends to be a lot more confidence, either warranted or unwarranted in some cases, from males. But I think having open conversations about it, in fact, Dr. Tanamachi introduced me to the concept of imposter syndrome when we were grad students, because we had the same advisor, and it was just like this door opened. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone, It was really, because for a long time there, I really, especially as a graduate student, really felt like I don't think I can do this. And I really felt like I was fooling people with my abilities. And somehow I just barely, I somehow was able to pull the wool over everybody's eyes and didn't really deserve to be where I was. So I think having open conversations and acknowledging that imposter syndrome is a thing, and it especially is hard on females, is a really important step forward, and can perhaps even help students who are considering STEM careers understand that they're not alone.
Yes, I'm really glad we got to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. I definitely think that's something that definitely needs to be brought up in many STEM conversations, because like Dr. Houser said, I think it primarily affects mostly women, but definitely there are men out there that could feel inadequate and don't think that they measure up. Definitely a really good topic that we cover on this. So we are on question number 5 out of 7. We're almost there to the end, but this one's a fun one. So starting with Dr. Tanamachi, in a brief summary, how did you figure out what area of science you wanted to specialize in?
I didn't decide, it chose me. And that was because I was growing up in the Twin Cities area back in the 1980s. And in 1986, there was a live television broadcast of a tornado that just happened to be captured by a television news helicopter that was on a totally separate assignment. And they just happened to see this tornado form, broadcast it live. I was watching that broadcast at age 7 and was absolutely captivated by it. And in the plethora of follow-up specials that they did based on that footage, they did an interview with Don Burgess, who's a scientist at the National Severe Storms Laboratory. That was my first exposure to the idea that you could actually make a career out of studying tornadoes. And it was like, I was set. That was where I was headed. I put my sail that way and went that way and never looked back. So it wasn't necessarily a matter of me trying to seek out a career that was a good fit for me. It found me, and when it got me, I got bit by that weather bug, and I was on my way.
Yes, I can second that. I think sometimes it just chooses us, rather we choose it. So really interesting. And I love Minnesota. Beautiful. My family's from there. So if no one's ever visited Minnesota, please go visit. It's beautiful. Moving on to Dr. Shivers-Williams.
Yeah, I've always been really interested in why people do the things that they do and like what kind of ticks in their head and things like that. And I was exposed to psychology in high school, actually, through my AP IB courses. And while most of it was abnormal, I was like, oh, okay, but this is pretty interesting. And so that's what I, decided to major in undergrad. And after getting a dose of all of the different types of psychology, I was like, oh, okay, I'm really interested in what motivates people, right, to do the things that they do, whether that's intrinsic or extrinsic. And I also I used to like binge watch Law and Order with my mom. So I was really interested in like forensic psychology and then like how that intersects with law. And I quickly figured out that law school was not for me. But grad school was. So I kind of shifted tracks and shifted back over to psychology. And then I've lived in lots of different parts of the country. So I'm originally from Texas. So I had experience with tornadoes as a kid. I went to undergrad in Baton Rouge, and I was there during Katrina, Rita, Ike, and Gustav. I then moved to the East Coast for grad school, and that was Snowmageddon and the random earthquake that we had. That was terrifying. I don't do earthquakes very well. But, in all of these different situations, you've got different people experiencing the same thing, but acting very differently. And so I then became driven to understand, okay, well, what's happening and why is it that people can be presented with the same stimuli and have completely different responses? And so that was kind of how I got into not just decision making, but as it pertains to threat. And I've done work also with response to terrorism and health threats and things like that. So in general, that was kind of how I got to this, I want to specialize in why people respond the way they do to threatening situations. And that's how I got into this.
Really glad to have you on the panel. I thought your background was really interesting. It kind of offers a different perspective on not just what we do at the National Weather Center, but the science of meteorology, what you can do with it. So really, really interesting. Dr. Sakaeda.
I think my initial interest in this field was through art. I liked painting clouds and skies. And it took me a while to figure out that I also like math. So if you put those together, then you come to the meteorology. So yeah, and I wasn't aware of the field of meteorology or atmospheric sciences. I grew up in the tropics, and I don't think we talk about forecasts as much in the tropics. But in my high school geography class, the teacher decided to talk about global circulation for one class, and that was enough for me to get interested. And then I decided after that class, I knew I wanted to major in atmospheric sciences. And then my specialty in tropical meteorology kind of came from the fact that I grew up in the tropics.
Awesome, really, really cool. Dr. Houser, how about you?
Sorry, I thought I clicked the unmute there and it didn't actually click. I'm kind of similar to what a lot of other meteorology students and professionals are. I think more so among students, professionals tend to come from a more diverse background. But I got the weather bug when I was a kid. When I was in second grade, we did a unit on meteorology, and I just was really excited about it. I started watching the Weather Channel, which was, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, back in the 80s when it was actually like legit science and not quite so much the fluffy Weather Channel that we have going on these days. But I would watch the Weather Channel like kids watch cartoons. I mean, I would sit there and just watch the Weather Channel for like an hour or 2 hours at a time, especially if there was a storm. And then I ordered, or I had my dad order some online, or not, this is way before the internet, but some videos, some home videos that were produced by the Weather Channel. And I was really especially fascinated with tornadoes. And funny enough, my grad school advisor ended up being in some of those videos. And I didn't, this was kind of unbeknownst to me as a young child. But then, you know, as I went through into grad school, I looked back on some of these videos. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's my advisor. And he had hair and, you know, 20, 30 years prior to that. But that, I just was enthralled by severe weather, particularly tornadoes, which is kind of, you know, growing up in Eastern Pennsylvania, I didn't have like a hands-on experience with tornadoes or anything. I just found them just fascinating and beautiful, and at the same time, you know, utterly destructive and violence too. And I think that sort of juxtaposition of beauty and violence really sort of captured my interest.
That is such a poetic way to explain why someone is interested in tornadoes. I love that. I love that. I'm going to have to start telling people that. To throw my short answer in, I caught the weather bug as a child as well. And I feel like I lean more towards Dr. Tanamachi's side of it chose me. My dad and I, we were in the May 3rd, 1999 tornado outbreak. And it was a life-changing day, and I never was scared. I just kind of, like you, Dr. Houser, I just wanted all of this information. I wanted videos, I wanted books. I just couldn't get enough of it, and I thought it was so fascinating. So I think it's really interesting, you know, us all talking about how we got to where we were, whether it chose us or we chose it. I think it's really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives on this.
I'm gonna jump in and say, so one of my quarantine hobbies has been painting tornadoes on masks. And I don't know how well you can see this, but yeah, this is the May 3rd, 99 tornado that I painted on a mask for my husband, and he's letting me borrow it for today. But follow my Twitter feed. You can see the other tornadoes that I painted on masks lately. It's just my way of staying sane while I'm in quarantine.
That is awesome.
Robin, remind me, when I am done recording this, we're all going to still be here. You stay on because I have questions for you. I want that. That's amazing. That's so funny. I love that. Absolutely. I love that. So we are on the second to last question. We're almost done here. I definitely think this is kind of a maybe more so personal question. If you don't feel like answering it, that's fine. I'm very aware that everyone growing up maybe didn't have a great experience in life, didn't have a good childhood. So I know it's going to sound silly when I recite the question, but I'm always very cognizant of how people grew up. So starting with Dr. Tanamachi, if you could go back in time to see your younger self, what advice would you give her?
So my answer might not be quite what you were aiming for, but I always tell my students, if I could go back to like my freshman year of college or even high school and give myself one piece of advice, it would be to take more computer programming. And that is because as a research meteorologist, a vast majority of what I do is either writing code or debugging other people's code. And I only got one semester of programming in a language that I never use as an undergraduate. And as a result, in graduate school and beyond, I basically had to teach myself everything. And that was a huge drain on my time. So I would definitely advise myself to go back and take a lot more computer science classes.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Dr. Shivers-Williams.
Yeah, that's great advice. I would say I would tell myself to continue to persevere. Like I've always been, you know, tenacious and persistent. But especially in some of the things that I've gone through. And, you know, we've talked a little bit about imposter syndrome. You know, again, I, as a graduate student and even as an early career professional, like attended conferences or workshops with my colleagues who were trained at larger, predominantly white institutes that had more resources, that had other things that we knew we didn't have. But again, that doesn't mean that I was not as well trained. Like I go to these spaces and you don't want to talk, you don't want to say anything, you don't want to be like, oh, they're going to figure out that I don't belong here. But the fact is that I do, and so do other people. You know, training models are different and everyone's got a different perspective and a different approach to doing things. So I would just, you know, tell myself to stay confident in what you do know and be humble about what you don't know and willing to always learn and try new things.
I love that. Dr. Sakaeda, how about you?
If I could give one advice to myself and go back in time, I would tell myself to seek more advice from a greater number of people. I was one of those students who were very scared or intimidated by professors, and I don't think I took the advantage of all the resources that I had. And from now I'm in the perspective of a professor, I'll be so happy to talk to students who would like to talk to me about anything that they're thinking about in terms of careers or academic goals. But I'm not the one who can really like force them to come talk to me, so it's kind of on them to reach out to me. So I think that's what I would tell myself to do.
So this is a sign. If you are too scared to go talk to your professor, go talk to them, please. They are wanting to listen to you. This is your sign. Dr. Houser, what about you?
Yeah, ditto to what Dr. Sakaeda said, because I would tell myself go back and ask more questions, particularly in grad school. I think undergrad, I maybe didn't have the self-confidence issues that I ended up having in grad school. But grad school, I just felt like I needed to make it look like I knew exactly what was going on, even when I didn't. So I think I really missed out on a lot of opportunities to really more deeply understand information, because I just sort of superficially passed over it because I knew what I needed to do to get by, but I didn't necessarily fully understand and engage. So I wish that I had been a little bit more okay with not knowing, and making it clear that, I want to understand better and I need assistance in getting me to that place.
Really, really good advice. And I think to a lot of people that maybe struggle with imposter syndrome, it's even more embarrassing to have to go and ask for help, because in a way you're validating to yourself, right, I'm not good enough to do this, I'm right. So it's important to distinguish. It is okay to not know every single thing, and it's okay to go get help, and you can still be very talented, very bright, very good at what you do, and you're meant to be where you're meant to be. So really, really good point. And this is bringing us to our last question of the panel. Really exciting. This is a nice kind of firecracker punch to the end. So we'll start with Dr. Tanamachi. So what advice do you have for young women who are interested in pursuing a STEM career, but they're intimidated by STEM?
To sum it up succinctly, just don't give up. Find mentors. Write to STEM professionals that you admire and get their advice and their life story. A lot of them are going to be more than generous with sharing their advice with you. And read books like Lab Girl and Black Hole Blues that really describe science careers through sort of a female perspective. Understand that a career in STEM is a journey and not a destination. Get rid of toxic mentors as quickly as possible if they do crop up in your life. And also always recognize that there's no single best way to become a STEM professional. A lot of times we conceive of being a STEM professional as sort of having a male mindset that's very analytical, very logical. But having the female perspective, having more of a right brain perspective can also, inspire you to be more creative in your research and to discover new things. And lastly, I would just say, take the long view, take good care of your whole self, not just your mind, also your spirit. Do what brings you joy. And when you do succeed, pay it forward.
I think I'm going to have to write some of these reminders to myself down. This is really great advice. Honestly, I love this. Moving on to Dr. Shivers-Williams.
I think Dr. Tanamachi just stole the show. But I will add an echo. Try again. We all fail at something, right? And fail is an ugly word. Nobody likes to say it, but we all come up short sometimes. And so it's all in how you get up, dust yourself off, and get back to it. Sometimes that might take a day. Sometimes that might take a week. Sometimes, we've all been in situations where we've had to fake smile our way through something, but, stay persistent and just keep trying. As Dr. Tanamachi said, seek mentors. And it took me a really long time to realize that you don't just have to have one mentor. You can have lots of mentors, and one mentor doesn't necessarily have to be the end all be all. right? Like some mentors might be for more academic things and advising things. Another mentor might be for more career trajectory things. A third mentor could be for more life things. I think that you're really lucky and blessed if you get an all-in-one kind of mentor. I know I was in my graduate school mentors. My primary academic advisor and my advisor in NCAS were like life mentors and academic mentors. And then also finding mentors that look like you is always ideal. And it's always nice to have someone who you can talk to about shared experiences, but also recognize that all mentors don't have to look like you. And other people can be allies as well, even if they haven't been through exactly what you've been through. If they're empathetic and sympathetic to the cause, they can still, help you with what it is that you're needing help with. Don't be afraid to show yourself. Like, your perspective is just as valid from everyone else's, right? We have in the US and most Western cultures a very individualistic perspective and an individualistic frame to the way in which we approach things, whereas other Eastern cultures or cultures of color tend to have a more collectivistic or communal approach. So just because your perspective and your experiences are different doesn't make them any less true or valid or applicable. And so, like, bring yourself to the picture and figure out what your niche is and what you can do that someone else can't. And then continue to be creative in the ways in which you problem solve. Sometimes it's not always A to B. Sometimes there are detours. Sometimes there are curved lines. Sometimes you go under the table. Like, be creative in where you seek help and where you seek resources and the way you get things done. That is a highly underrated skill, I personally believe.
Awesome. Really great advice. Thank you. Dr. Sakaeda?
I kind of echo the prior comment. I think I would advise to find a network of support. And I think the network is the important part. As Dr. Shivers-Williams said, not one mentor can support you in all aspects of your life, and career is just one aspect of your life. And it doesn't even have to be just mentors. Friends and family can still be a part of your supportive network. And I think having the broadcast of network would be helpful to go through maybe some challenging times of your life or career.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Dr. Houser?
Yeah, I'm not really going to add anything new here, but what originally came to my mind was reach out to somebody who you can identify with, or who your interests are similar to, and reach out to that person who is like a professional, and start up a conversation. And usually those people are going to be more than receptive to giving you advice or to telling you about their experience, and to perhaps help calm some of the fears that you might have going forward with your STEM desires.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question to kind of summarize everything we've been talking about on the panel, our journeys, our backgrounds, our differences, our own personal experiences. I think this is a really great question to end our panel on. I'm more than happy to have any open discussions if there's anything, but I think we all answered everything so wonderfully and fully that I can't possibly think of anything else. And so everyone, please stay on to the Zoom call. I'm just going to be ending this recording of the panel. So thank you all for watching this panel and sending in wonderful questions. Please feel free to comment on this video and reach out to us if you have any questions. If you have any further questions for our panelists, please feel free to do so. We hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your National Weather Festival week and enjoy the rest of the content. And thank you so much for joining us today.